You're listening to the Passport Podcast, brought to you by the Travel Technology Association. Travel Tech is a nonprofit that promotes and protects the travel tech industry, supporting our members, both large and small. On each episode of the Passport Podcast, we sit down with an industry leader to dive deep into the intersection of travel, technology, and public policy, helping our listeners understand how larger debates in Washington, D.C., and state houses across the country will impact the travel tech industry. Welcome to the final episode of the Passport Podcast for 2025. I'm your host, Laura Chadwick, President and CEO of the Travel Technology Association. Over the past year, new technologies, shifting policies, and standout innovators have had a big impact on the travel technology industry. At Travel Tech, we've had a busy year building out our startup membership program, hosting our inaugural Startup Summit and second annual Policy and Innovation Showcase on Capitol Hill, and of course, launching this year podcast, our Passport Podcast. The Passport Podcast is a complement to our free weekly Passport newsletter, which provides news about how travel tech is supporting the travel tech industry, along with an e-news digest tracking the top issues at the corner of travel, technology, and public policy. In today's episode, we're taking a look back at the top moments from this season of the Passport Podcast. Let's dive right in. For our inaugural episode, I was joined by Brandon Palumbo, Travel Tech's Director of Policy and Government Relations, where we discussed the new Trump administration, the new Congress, and its potential impacts on the travel tech industry. This one, titled Frontier Airlines Offers to Buy Spirit Airlines Again. This was published in the New York Times on January 29th. So with this particular article, I'm sure we could talk about airline competition and the like, and perhaps we'll get into this. But I was more curious about, Brandon, your thoughts on where do we think the Trump administration is on antitrust merger related issues?
Yeah, well, it's interesting and maybe a little counterintuitive. So, from what we've seen from Trump's first administration through Biden's 4 years, through this new Trump administration now, is that Trump has actually been pretty consistent on antitrust and just competition issues generally, really going after anti-competitive behavior. Remember that in the first administration, it was actually Trump's Department of Justice that brought the initial lawsuit onto Google for some anti-competitive behaviors that it alleged. And we just saw a culmination of that, not the culmination, but a continuation of that last year with the Biden administration. And that's still ongoing. We don't know exactly how the Trump administration plans to pursue that. But we do have some indications here. We have certain people that are being put in place at the Department of Justice. One of those people that we note is Gail Slater. For insiders, you might know that she worked for Vice President J.D. Vance when he was in the Senate, backed his more pro-worker, more pro-labor agenda, I guess, that you could also associate with Senator Josh Hawley on the Judiciary Committee currently, the senator from Missouri. It's really a part of this shift towards populism that we see in the Republican Party, and it's definitely a split, but it is an indication of where Trump and his administration is oriented there. So actually, I do think that industry might be in for a surprise. Maybe they expect to have a more friendly environment, just total deregulatory, total merger friendly. But I think there's room there for industry to be a little.
I think what you're saying is that
Yeah.
they might be in for a surprise here, right? AI dominated headlines this past year, and its impact on the travel industry was certainly top of mind for many industry leaders. In episode 2, I was joined by Carroll Rheem, founder and CEO of the Iolite Group and former director of research at Focusrite. She and I discussed her recent research tracking consumers' points of view about AI and its application in the travel industry. As I said in my intro, AI is a big topic of interest, not just for the travel industry, for the policymakers as well. Now, I understand that you have done some great research into consumers' take on the use of AI tools generally and within the travel industry. I'd love to hear what, your biggest takeaways were from that research and what you learned about the state of AI in the travel industry.
As a fan of technology in general and what it can do for the travel industry, I knew for a long time AI would bring about so much progress and change and innovation. I think what was key for me was timing it correctly because you can't go too early before consumers really have tools that they can experience easily and have access to. So 2024 was the right time to really start to dig into what was available, how people were interacting with it, what they wanted to do, because we need enough of a threshold of people who are familiar enough with it and have had some experience to do this kind of research. So we were excited to go to the field and we learned a lot about just what people were interested in doing. And for most people, they're still kind of in an experimental phase, not at a phase where they're counting on it and saying, this is the way I always do things. It's still kind of like, let's just see what happens when I do a query about this. And as we go into 2025, we'll see more intensive usage of it and more expectations about its utility. But for this initial study, what we saw mostly was just that people were giving it a shot and seeing what happens. One of the things that I thought most interesting, though, so we asked people if they were aware of AI and if they had used it. So taking the broader group of everyone who was at least aware of it, we asked them if they were going to do anything using Gen AI in the future. So a lot of these people had not used AI up till that point, but over 90% of them said that they anticipated that they would try doing something with it in the next 12 months. So this is a massive shift towards the mainstream when we think about kind of where we were in 2024 and now going into 2025. So really, we think this year is the year where it truly becomes mainstream.
Fascinating. And of course, you were there, you were telling us at the hotel reservation desk, right? I see this. And you thought, well, everyone should be booking this way. Do you get the same sort of feeling that everyone's going to be using AI? Are we talking internet level, shift in the industry?
Yeah, I don't think it will be quite so stark just because we're already in the digital space. So changing which website you go to or some of that process is not as drastically different as going physically to a travel agent's office or picking up the phone and having a conversation. So while I do think this will absolutely become mainstream and as mainstream as booking travel online will be, I don't think it will feel quite so different as the transition from the analog world to the digital world.
Earlier this year, the Genius Act was signed into law, marking a major step towards establishing clear federal standards for stablecoin adoption. After its passage, I was joined by Jessica Martinez, Senior Director of Government Relations at the Blockchain Association, where she and I explored what stablecoins are and how they might impact the travel industry in the future. I can imagine as this new approach to money and currency and banking and the like, it's definitely raised some ears. Congress, right? Congress obviously has a very strong position, a regulatory position, and agencies have a regulatory position on money related issues. So this, I'm sure, was a complete. This is new to them, right? And the challenge of explaining something new.
Absolutely. I remember first hearing about blockchain technology and the promise of what it can be back in 2018 when I was at the Federal Communications Commission. I was working under then Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel. She had an op ed out, and it was pretty cool tech, right? It was like, oh, this could be, helping to advance into the next phase of the internet and things like that. And people, I had gone back to the Hill and was a staffer after that. And there were whispers. I think there was a little bit of like, there is this new cryptocurrency, we're trying to figure out how being used and what, if any, if there's like really real world use cases that could be helpful and benefit consumers in the US. And then I think it's just grown over time. I think that throughout the last 10 plus years, the industry has gone through many changes, and I can see it finally kind of coming into its next phase, which is really bringing a lot of these ideas that they had 10 years ago into practice and seeing them develop and actually becoming physical items or real world use cases that are being used now. And so I think that's where we see a lot of Congress getting their ears perked up, listening in, trying to understand what's happening as well in this space. I mean, I think it's also hard to deny, as this new administration has come in, this president is very interested in our industry and interested in learning about the industry. And I think that signaled to all of DC, hey, we're going to start talking more about crypto now. And so at the beginning of this year, it really has just been a sprint to ensure that the legislation that has been actually in the works for years is actually coming in and had an opportunity to really get a markup, a floor vote. It had an opportunity this year to get really worked on. And I think it is, in no small part because of this administration pushing that through. And so that's why we see this year the real shift in looking at cryptocurrency, looking at stablecoin especially as well. I would say stablecoins is one of the three legs of a stool that is needed for good crypto legislation. You need that stable coin. You need to be able to ensure that you're protecting consumers there. But you also need market structure legislation, which I think will be coming up. We see that coming up this fall in the Senate, which is going to be also another space to provide clear rules of the road for exchanges and also classifications of tokens. And then finally, we'll also be looking at a digital asset tax package. Because I mean, at the end of the day, how you tax it and how the government taxes everything is really what's going to help move and shape these economies here. And so we'll be looking at that and advocating for good policy there as well. And that's something else that I think we'll see down the road. You mentioned it earlier, or you mentioned it on what we'll see down the road. I think other items are, you can pass these big bills, but that's the first half of it. You
Right.
still need to get through those agencies. And when the rulemaking comes, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? That's when those lines and those words really matter. I mean, they all matter. And I can say that as a former staffer. I know that writing legislation is so important, but it is really important is looking at those regulators and seeing how they interpret those laws.
Supporting the newest generation of travel tech startups is a major initiative here at Travel Tech. We do so through our startup membership program geared towards early stage founders. Membership benefits include free access to Matt Zito's 4-week Travel Tech Startup Accelerator program, opportunities for startups to pitch their companies at our quarterly Startup and Investor Connect webinars, and our monthly meetups to hear from travel tech investors and industry experts and to build community among those early stage travel tech founders. Matt Zito joined me on a Passport podcast episode to discuss the role of startups in the travel tech industry. He gave us advice on how to pitch to investors and what investors in the travel industry should know and more.
A lot of times that travel investors understand the travel industry as a whole. Like you mentioned, it's very fragmented, it's complicated. There's leisure travel, there's business travel, there's B2C or B2B, selling direct to consumers or selling direct to corporations or different things. And especially in the pre-seed to seed stage, when you're pitching investors, a lot of those investors are not what we call travel tech investors, right? There's a very small amount of them that actually in the actual world that understand, how the full scope of things, right? So one of the things you need to do is, as a travel startup investor, you need to create two pitch decks. So we talk about this a little bit in the acceleration program, and two two pitch decks. There's one is that your grandmother can understand,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is for real.
Yeah.
And then the one a travel tech investor like Gilead can understand.
And you're
And
saying Gilead Bernstein, right?
yeah, Gilead Bernstein, yeah, who participates in the Travel Tech Association's webinars
Yeah.
and looking for
And
investment.
we have
looking
one
to make investment.
upcoming.
We have one coming up October
Less
15th.
than 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, coming up October 15th. So, and you literally have to literally just find someone that doesn't know anything about travel and pitch them and get it to a point where they think they actually understand it, because that would be number one. That's the number one thing. And it's okay to just dumb stuff down, because it's just really, you should be at a high level, explain what you're doing, even though if it's technical in nature. You just really need to show what the proposition, the value props, and the solution you're providing. And then I would say the other thing is that travel startups should let investors know about is that it's a long haul. I don't think it's necessarily our industry, but it takes really like 10 years. It takes that long. If you succeed, it takes that long for you to become something. Maybe 7, maybe if you're lucky, maybe 7, but it's really that long. If you look at the majority successful travel startups, and from when they started to when people could say like, okay, they're not going to go away anymore. Like they're here to stay. That's like a 7 to 10 year time period, closer to 10 years, really realistic. Investors need to understand that going into the investing with you. And startups don't articulate that.
Yeah, and that's one of the points that this article makes is patience, right? It's the investors who are impatient, right? They're looking for like, give us the bottom line. When is our investment going to pay off? But so that's really interesting to hear that the startups themselves, right, are saying you need to think about this in the long term. I liken that, I have a policy background, having worked for Congress, been a federal lobbyist and the like. People are always like, well, we should pass a law. We should fix that, pass a law. And well, Congresses are 2 years in length, one half and the second half. We're in the first half of this Congress, and the next year will be the second half of this Congress. But it actually takes, if you want to pass a law, it takes about 10 years to continue to hit the pavement. The members of Congress change, the issue changes, like there are developments. I always like to see industry stepping in to fix the issues, letting the market fix the issue, and not letting policymakers, right? Policymakers should be used when there is an intractable issue, but I think that the market and innovation can solve a lot of the problems. So I hear you on the patience front. To get to that profitable space, it needs time. It doesn't happen like it does in movies, right? It's just like, get the money, bingo bango, here we go, everything is great. It's been quite a year. As we head into 2026, Travel Tech looks forward to continuing to support the travel tech industry through our advocacy, events, startup membership program, and more. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you in 2026. Want to stay up to date every week on current and emerging policy issues facing the travel tech industry? Be sure to sign up for Travel Tech's free Passport newsletter at traveltech.org/subscribe. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.